Morning, everybody. This is the final of our COP26 stepping stone events ahead of our COP26 Edinburgh Summit, which will be scarily, I think, next Wednesday and Thursday. It seems to have crept up very quickly, but we've been doing this in partnership with City of Edinburgh Council, and it's been a really, really productive few months. It's the final of the 4 themed events that we've focused on: green finance, green tourism, the built environment for a World Heritage City, and green, finally, food and drink. I just thought I might mention very briefly before we get into this morning, very good news that the rail strike has been averted. Yay. So anybody planning to go to Glasgow, you can start booking your train tickets. But I did also want to mention and take the opportunity that last Thursday, we did a transport update with Transport for Scotland, which was chaired by George Loader, Chief Executive of Transport for Edinburgh. And as Alan Laidlaw articulately said, it put the wind up us all, because there's going to be major congestion, I think, not just around Glasgow city centre and the central belt between Edinburgh and Glasgow. We've got quite a number of heads of state staying in Edinburgh, plus a number of delegates. So they will all be migrating across to Glasgow each day. And I think there are a number of planned protests and probably a number of unplanned protests around the city as well. So anybody thinking of travelling into Edinburgh or to Glasgow, plan ahead, give yourself plenty of time. And I think there's a really good site, Get Ready Glasgow, which should give you up-to-date travel details. So I just thought I'd throw that in ahead of COP next week. So yes, this is our final event, food and drink, following on from our other themed events. I guess this is an area that affects us all, whether we're producers, manufacturers, hospitality, retail, and consumers. And I think the global food system is set to face some unprecedented pressures over the next decade as demand for resources and the effects of climate change intensifies. The areas that we need to look at: efficient use of water, waste reduction, circular economy for packaging, and also a better understanding of supply chains and transportation issues. So I think there's lots of things to grapple with. And just having a quick chat with our panelists earlier, there's also a number of myths that are driving behavioural change that may not be that helpful. So it's really important to get some of these things on the table and find out what the truth and the solutions are. And I mentioned, we seem to be bombarded at the moment by these press releases from endless expert bodies. And I feel these headline grabbing press releases seem to be not that helpful. So it feels a bit disjointed at the moment. So I think it's really important if we can have a great discussion today and get the issues out on the table, because that's the only way we're going to uncover the way forward. And I kind of raised the Sir Patrick Vallon's press release this morning, seemingly at odds with government policy. So that's a great example of, we're all a bit like rabbits in the headlights at the moment. What is the right thing to do? And I think it's really important as a city that we come together, and hence the partnership between the City of Edinburgh Council and the Chamber of Commerce as we try and unravel some of the issues. So I'm really delighted that we've got our own panel of experts who can help share some insights this morning. They've been briefed, so hopefully they'll all speak on slightly different issues, and then we can get into a discussion afterwards. So I'm just going to run through the speakers. I'm not going to great deal of introduction, because I'm keen that we hear from our speakers and then open up to Q&A afterwards. So just running through the speakers that we've got this morning, got Alan Laidlaw, who is Chief Executive of the Royal Highland and Agricultural Society Scotland, supporting and representing the farming and agricultural sector. Also host to the world famous Royal Highland Show, and Alan is very proud of the fact that the Royal Highland Showcase that happened this year was streamed in every country in the world, bar China and Greenland, I think. So he's keen to remedy that if anybody wants to get hold of some relatives and colleagues in those countries. And you know, another sort of surprising fact, they host over 200 events across the year at the showground and contribute more than £250 million to Scotland's economy. So extraordinary organisation. We've got Annalise Matthews, who's waste management consultant at Vegware. It's a compostable packaging company. Who's going to look at the impact of packaging. Fiona Borthwick, who's Programme Director for the MSc in Global and Food Security and Nutrition at the University of Edinburgh. He's really going to talk about the university strategy, how they're leaning into this, and the importance of partnerships in addressing these issues. Delighted we've got Hamish Torrey, who has the wonderful job of being the CSR Communications Director at the Glenmorangie Company. I'm sure we're all very envious of that. Who's going to look at sustainable innovation in the whisky industry. And delighted to welcome our international speaker, Noah Bars, who's City Analyst, Circular Economy Amsterdam, sharing an international perspective with us. And I was really fascinated, very much like the line in your bio, Noah, that said that, which probably is what we all aspire to, you found the sweet spot between idealism and pragmatism. I wish more people could find that sweet spot at the moment. So really looking forward to what you've got to say this morning. We've given everybody the impossible task of 8 minutes to get their message across. So, you know, I think we've got a full morning ahead of us, and hopefully there'll be good Q&A. Please either put them in the chat or put your hand up. We'll try and scan to get your questions asked. So if I can hand over to Alan first. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz, and good morning, everyone. What a great way to start the morning, a wet morning. And I thought Noah's piece about, you know, idealism, I think food is an area that idealism comes into it a lot. We all have a very personal relationship with food because it's effectively one of the main things that we can choose to do with our body. There's a New York-based author, Eve Turrell-Paul, and through the financial crisis and the climate crisis, she talks about food decisions being one of the few decisions millennials are able to make about their lives, you know, because actually so many other things happen to them. So therefore, food becomes identity. Food becomes, I am a vegetarian, I am a meat eater, I am an omnivore. And actually, you know, those conversations become quite binary quite quickly. And for me, they get quite boring because actually people don't enter that middle ground. They don't speak to people like Fiona to understand what great work is being done across, you know, the circular economy. They don't find out from Hamish's sector how they're already doing lots of good work. And that's what frustrates me as an agriculturalist. So I'll speak as a sort of human being who eats quite a lot of food, probably more food than I should, and you know, who has an interest in agriculture. The Royal Highland Society has been around for a couple of 100 years. We promote the interests of food farming and rural life. So a thriving rural economy is probably one of the best examples of a circular economy. And I've ended up here because I've reminded Liz that you know, some real bad things happened in Edinburgh when they built walls and forgot about the countryside outside them, i.e. Edinburgh would go very hungry if it wasn't for the Lothians and the Borders and Fife, etc., because that is where we get our food. I think there's a lot of myths out there about food and food choices. And I think, you know, people can make some pretty broad and bold statements. I think one of my things is if we want our economies to be circular, starting as close to home as you can is not a bad place to start. The food of a Burns night is haggis, neeps and tatties, probably because it was seasonal and local. And you know, potatoes and neeps can be stored over the winter. The haggis was probably made with the blood from the pig that was killed for a Martinmas or Christmas fair. And that's why those sort of meals work. Don't eat strawberries in December. I had a quick look at our fridge this morning, and there are some strawberries from probably too close to Noah rather than around here. And that's, you know, that's a food choice we've made. So I think for me, it's about finding out what local means. A lot of people will talk about eat local, but they won't know how to do that. That might be buying local food from a well-known shop around them, or it might be buying Scottish produce only from your supermarket. And I think ultimately Scotland is a bit of a village. Most of our food, by comparison to the world market, is local to us. Even if you buy cheese from Mull, it is probably pretty local. And I think it's about finding out those food choice options that you've got. Agriculture is responsible for, I believe, 10% of greenhouse gases. Transport is responsible for 27%, and our residential footprint is responsible for 15%. Now, Fiona is looking at me in great detail. She'll fact check me at some point, but I think it's about perspective. Every one of us eats because we have to eat. If the one thing that the pandemic has taught us is we don't all have to travel as much as we have done or we do. And I think that's one of the challenges around that is understanding where the balance is. So for me, Liz, it's about making good food choices, making informed choices. And one of the best ways to do that is to have discussions with food producers, because every one of us has an individual relationship with our food. And if our favorite thing is porridge, what better thing to do than speak to the farmer who produces your porridge? Now, that is not easy. You cannot walk into a field and say, Mr. Farmer growing those oats over there, please tell me how you produce them. You can do that at the Royal Highland Show in June. You can do that through the Royal Highland Education Trust, who works with schools and kids all over the country to have those type of discussions. There's a lot more farmers and good communicators on social media happy to have conversations around food, and I would encourage you, if you're interested, to ask questions and to do that. For me, that's about understanding what your food choices make. I think one of my biggest issues is actually food waste, because agriculture quite often gets lumped with, you grew it, it's your footprint. But actually, if people eat it, it's benefiting them and sustaining the world. If they don't eat it, that is an absolute waste. That's 100% waste. And that footprint really is a wasted opportunity. And I think some of the myths that you talked about, Liz, pertaining to Scotland are really interesting. I'm sure Hamish will talk about water later in the whisky industry. We have a surplus of water. It is absolutely soaking in East Lothian at the moment, overnight. If we were to produce milk for the whole world, there's 278 million dairy cows in the world. If they're all producing milk in the same way as the British systems do, that number could be 76 million, because we do it in a different way to many of the grazing systems out in the rest of the world, and our water impact. In our family, we've had somebody who's now developed a dairy intolerance, much to their frustration, I suspect. In looking for alternatives, we've settled on oat milk, and we've settled on oat milk mostly from the Lothians, from a company called Bros down in East Lothian, because it's local to us. We looked at almond milk, and I was reminded of a story of a group of young farmers that went to California recently. But it was not that recently, because no one's been allowed to travel for a very long time. But a couple of years ago, they went to California and they realized that almond milk needs 54 inches of water a year to be producible in a state that gets less than 4 inches of water. And then it's transported. So, while your dairy alternative is up to you to make a choice, there are alternatives that could be much closer to the Edinburgh economy, employing people locally and sustaining East Lothian, the borders, Fife, than just bringing something in which might have a far greater climate impact from across the world. So for me, Liz, I think achieving net zero is very tough. I think making good personal decisions is really challenging because of those binary discussions. I'm a vegetarian, you're a meat eater, I'm right, you're wrong. That's a really sad place for us to be. And on that, agriculture is doing so much already to reduce soil carbon losses, to improve soil carbon through regenerative agriculture, less ploughing, more direct drilling of sowing of seeds. And when people say, stop eating beef and lamb and things like that, actually you forget that those beef and lamb products probably sustain organic production of cereals, because without eating beef and lamb, we won't have beef and lamb muck. which then helps to sustain that circular economy for keeping organic cereals healthy and well fed, and stops us having to use bagged ammonium nitrate fertilizers and things like that. However, the ammonium nitrate discussion got more complicated a few months ago when we all started to run out of CO2, because ammonium nitrate is a byproduct of CO2 production as well, or the other way around. And so all of these things are interlinked. So make good decisions, ask good questions, engage where you can about where your food comes from. And I will stop there.
Brilliant. I think that was your timer going off. You did really well there, Alan. That's brilliant. And all that resonates with me. And hopefully we're going to get a good discussion about this afterwards, because as a city, we do have to come together, and I think we've got to delve behind the myths, the misinformation and the preconceptions, and find out what we can do as a city to deliver net zero. And I think something that you didn't touch on, but we've discussed in the past is, well, you touched on it very briefly, when we eat our Weetabix in the morning, we're not sharing that carbon footprint. It's the farmer who takes the entire carbon footprint. And yet if we could spread that along the supply chain or upstream, and we all take a little bit of it, and then we all modify our behavior slightly, that all collectively will make a big impact. So I think sometimes the way we kind of throw all the carbon footprint at the farmer is probably unfair. But again, hopefully we'll have a good discussion about that. But thank you very much. So I'm now going to hand over, if I get my notes here, I was too busy writing, to Annalise. I think you're next if you'd like to come in. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to come and have a talk to you guys today. And thank you, Alan, for that conversation. That was really interesting. And I'm also going to touch on, I think, some of the points you brought up, particularly around sort of locking in carbon into soils, local resources and farming as well. So hopefully it'll sort of make sense. I'll just share my screen, which hopefully you'll all be able to see. Hopefully you can all see that now. Is that right? Yeah, okay, let's hope that is. Okay, so my name's Annalise and I'm from the company Vegware, which you might be familiar with, but if not, Vegware is a compostable packaging company with the UK headquarters based in Edinburgh, and we operate globally. So although a big market of ours is Edinburgh and it's Scotland, we sell all over the world, and we've been manufacturing these compostable items since 2006. And I sit within the environmental team, so I focus on waste management, so the end of life for these products. And something which Alan was touching on was sort of food waste, and hopefully you'll understand from this presentation how we help deal with removing food waste from landfill or from sort of incineration waste streams and try and get it diverted to compost, which ultimately can help with farmers and locking in carbon into soil. So one of the problems with traditional packaging, which you might be familiar with, is that it can be very difficult to recycle. If you think of something like a sandwich box, you've got a plastic and you've got a cardboard, and there might even be a film lining inside as well. This becomes really difficult to recycle because there's different materials all attached to each other. And these materials need different waste streams to be recycled. So you would need a cardboard or paper waste stream for the paper part, and then you would need a plastic film recycling for the plastic film window, perhaps. You then have the issue that nowhere's going to separate these. And on top of that, you have food contamination. Food contamination can be a real issue for general recycling. A lot of recycling facilities don't want poorly and like really badly contaminated materials. So if you think about something like a greasy pizza box, that material becomes quite invaluable to them because it's contaminated with grease, it's not good quality, and ultimately it can end up in landfill or incineration because it's not of that high quality they're looking for. The Vegware solution is really that ultimately we make the materials all from we make the products all from materials which can be composted together along with any food waste contamination. And these are certified in their finished form. So they're certified compostable, which means the composting facilities are happy to accept them. And we produce over 400 different products now. So should you have a catering outlet or let's say like a stadium or a school, or even something like a university, all the items are there for you, which could be switched to compostable ones. So sandwich boxes, all the way through to hot cups, soup containers, cutlery. And the materials that these are made from are all plant-based materials, so they're all renewable resources, and ultimately then can also all be broken down in a composting facility. So there's no need for sort of sending these off to landfill or incineration. And I'll quickly whiz through here some of the materials which we use. I think some people find it quite interesting because some of them don't look like perhaps sort of more like the palm leaf products. The PLA and CPLA is definitely one which we get asked about most. And this makes sort of our cold cups and our hot cup linings and our hot cup lids and our cutlery. This is essentially polylactic acid, which is derived from, it could be sugarcane or corn or even other resources. And this is a material which is great because it feels very similar to traditional plastics. So the consumer, it's not like wooden cutlery, which some consumers don't like, but ultimately it can still be composted down under that 12-week process. And this is great for cold and hot use as well. And the difference between the two is really just that you add chalk to the clear PLA to make it suitable for hot use. The bagasse you may have seen around if you go and eat out in cafes or restaurants, and this is sort of used for takeaway. So maybe at the end of the meal, you could have leftovers put in this box to be taken away, or even things like fish and chips and burgers at rugby matches and things. Bagasse is made from sugarcane again, and it's a really nice, sturdy and practical material. And unlike sort of the traditional polystyrene, which previously made up a lot of clamshells, which are used within the UK, it's suitable for hot use because it's breathable. It doesn't sort of have all this condensation building up inside it. And again, can be composted and broken down nice and easily at a composting facility. Paper and card make up a big use of our materials, as you can probably imagine. And we are making sure that when we're using paper and card, it's from sustainably sourced resources. And where we can, we use a recycled content. This can be tricky because there are quite strict rules around using recycled content with food. But where we can, we make sure it's recycled. Inks, we have our own branding on the cups, but also lots of companies use our cups and they have their own branding on them. We also make sure that they're vegetable or water-based, so there's no environmental impact, cause it leaching out when you're breaking down the inks into compost. Natureflex is a nice material. It's the same that you have on the outside of your quality streets at Christmas. It's a clear film made from wood pulp, and that's made in Cumbria. And it's great because it's heat sealable as well, so it can be used for many different uses, like little sweet bags and things that you might sort of zip up with a heat sealant. And then palm leaf is one which is has that sort of eco look and eco feel to it, and that's simply made from palm leaves, which drop to the floor after they produce the nut, which is what they're grown for. And these would otherwise be burnt at source, and we sort of reuse these and mold them into shapes which can be used to serve food in. Something I really wanted to touch on today was sort of what we're doing outside of creating the packaging, and that's sort of dealing with our waste management. We, as a company, wanted to take waste management seriously because we are ultimately producing the packaging. We want to make sure there are suitable outlets for it. So we have a team dedicated to this. And in Scotland, I sort of look after the collection that we run ourselves in the Central Belt, which is sort of Glasgow, Edinburgh, St Andrews, Dundee. And elsewhere, we recommend collectors who can take our waste to in-vessel composting facilities. So something which you might not be aware of is in the UK, there's sort of two outlets for food waste. One is in-vessel composting and one is anaerobic digestion. And primarily, it's only really in-vessel composting facilities which can accept the veg products. There are a few exceptions to this. So we like to make sure that anyone who's using our products, we can put them in touch with a collector who can appropriately dispose of them. And we support our clients doing this by talking to local composting facilities, to talking to local waste collectors, and sort of building up a route as such, and joining all the dots together. The veg and food waste is then taken and broken down in under 12 weeks to a high-grade compost, which could be used by local farmers, local authorities, even sold back into sort of garden centres for the public to use. And the great thing about compost is that it's a local traceable recycling solution. So sort of something which I know Alan was touching on about, making sure that, where we can, we're using local resources. This is a great solution for waste. It's all local. there's lots of rules around food waste being exported, and you can't export food waste outside of the UK. So you have to have it treated inside the UK. And so, for example, with our route in Scotland, we use composting facilities dotted around Scotland. So we make sure that the waste isn't travelling great distances to be dealt with. And then ultimately, it also means that our products and any food scraps which end up on those products are then used for compost by local people as well. I wanted to just also talk you through perhaps a case study of a site which we've been working with for a few years now, one which hopefully you're all familiar with, which is Dynamic Earth, which is a really lovely sort of tourist attraction and sort of education site based right in the heart of Edinburgh itself. And this hopefully will sort of show you how we work with clients to get them composting. Ultimately, we encourage them to switch their products to vegware, and this means that all the products in the cafe could be composted. You don't want to be using plastic lid with a compostable cup, so we get them to switch all of that through. We then help them communicate the system, so we don't just say to them, look, here's our bins, put the vegware in it. We really help at site level by introducing signage and posters, and this helps us capture as much of the vegware and food waste as possible. And then we help them measure and communicate it. So here we sort of would shout about the fact that this is an example, like within 5 months they recycled 1.38 tons of compostable material. And we help them communicate that to their staff and to their visitors. And this can really sort of increase the amount of waste which they're actually segregating correctly. And as well as segregating it for vegware and food waste, it means their mixed recycling stream is cleaner as well. So the recycling facilities are generally happier as well. And I just wanted to really touch on, right at the end of this, is the benefits of compost, which sort of draws in some of the things Alan was talking about. Compost is a fantastic resource which helps nourish soils, you know, it sequesters carbon and keeps the carbon locked in, and ultimately helps grow healthy plants, which is what we need. A lot of people aren't aware that the soil structures across the UK aren't in great condition, and compost can really help improve this. Ultimately, it can help reduce flood risk as well. If the soils are in really good quality, have a really high quality, they can help sort of absorb water which during heavy rainfall, so the water isn't rushed off into local rivers where they might then burst their banks, causing flooding. And you know, the vegware we think is beneficial to composters because it helps as a dry mix as part of their material. So the end result isn't too wet and sloppy. You know, you want a nice dry compost. And ultimately, it helps with that food waste, which Alan was talking about. It helps make sure that it's diverted from landfill or incineration into a correct waste stream where it can be composted down. And I think that's it. I'm a little bit over on my time there. Sorry about that. But hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview about what we do at Vegware.
That was brilliant, actually, Annalise. Worth every minute of that to listen to it. And just, I guess for me, I mean, I know Vegware has been around a good number of years now. I think I remember when you were probably a small startup about 10, 12 years ago. I think Vegware was one of the first winners of our annual awards back about 10, 11 years ago. So it's amazing to see where you've come as a startup company, but just the innovation, the research and the knowledge that's been put into this product. And for me, it's finding the right solutions. I see there was a question in the chat from Michael Lenahan saying, let's get beyond seeing how difficult this is and decarbonize the food system. I suppose that absolutely is a necessity, and I'll try and bring somebody in at the end of the panel session to address that question. But I guess it's the innovation, it's the different thinking, and that will find the right solutions to this. So brilliant presentation, thank you very much. I'm now going to go over to Fiona Borthwick, who's Programme Director for the MSc in Global Food Security and Nutrition at the University of Edinburgh.
Hello, good morning. Sorry, there's always one that stays on mute a little bit too long. So I'm hoping that you can now see my presentation. So I've been asked to talk to you today about the University of Edinburgh and the role that we're playing, our strategy to engage with the climate crisis, but also to talk about my role within the Global Academy of Agriculture and Food Security, which was set up around about 4 years ago at the University of Edinburgh as part of the university's approach to the Sustainable Development Goals and really being active, critical participants in those goals. So what I wanted to start doing today was talking about our strategy for 2030 as a university. So the university has been an active member of the community of Edinburgh for over 400 years. So obviously we have a very unique role to play in terms of addressing the climate crisis and other issues as well. And these are really embedded in the university strategy. So I've sort of summarized the objectives for 2040. And that is to become a zero carbon university by 2040, a zero waste university by 2040, to really widen participation in higher education and to recognise our unique role in terms of working together with local communities, and to also be really engaged with the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals across all of the goals. And because we're a university, we have a really unique role to play, because obviously we are a world-class research university. So we need to make sure that our research is really driving innovation and driving the responses to the various different crises that we're facing at a global level, but also to feed those back into our local community in Edinburgh and the Lothians. We're obviously also a teaching university, so how can we make sure that our learning and teaching is really addressing these strategic objectives as well, and to also make sure that we can empower the people that work and learn within the university. So those are the sort of the key strategic goals, and then obviously it's great to have goals, but how are you actually going to deliver on those goals? So I'm just highlighting the measures of success that have been put into our strategy, and that is very much based on the evidence-based targets for carbon emissions. So by 2030 by 2025 to cut carbon emissions per million pound revenue will be reduced by 50%. And then to return our carbon emissions to 2007-8 benchmark levels by 2025. So obviously this requires activity across all of the different aspects of the university, and that's similar for big organisations, including the City of Edinburgh and many of the businesses and organisations that operate in Edinburgh. So the different areas that need to really embed these measures of success are the buildings. We own a large number of buildings within Edinburgh, so making sure that we can improve the infrastructure, improve heating and energy use. But also as a global university, we have to really look at business travel and really embrace the enforced new adoption of online collaboration and reduce our business travel as much as possible. We also are landowners and across Scotland, not just in Edinburgh. So how can we make sure that we're investing in that land and investing in communities so that we can sequester carbon where possible and invest in biodiversity, because we also mustn't forget that we're living through a biodiversity crisis as well. We are involved in complex supply chains. So in terms of catering, and other procurement policies, how can we make sure that we are good neighbours both locally and globally? How as a university can we empower our students and our people to make decisions and to be active members of the community? And then also I'll just shift to the research and innovation, because innovation has been mentioned a couple of times this morning, and how really important innovative thinking and innovative approaches are to addressing these very, very complex problems that we're talking about. So I work within the Global Academy of Agriculture and Food Security. As I said, it was set up quite recently. It's at its heart is looking across food systems and how we can embed the Sustainable Development Goals into the work that we do to address global challenges in food systems. So looking at agri-food system innovation, looking at food, people and planet, so sustainable diets and sustainable agriculture. And something that is running through all of the work that we do is data-driven innovation. How can we use new innovations in data collection and data analysis to make informed evidence-based decisions about food systems? So just to sort of overview some of the work that we do at the Global Academy, we look, as I say, across food systems, so that's in production, and I know that we work with a large number of farming organisations and communities, both within Scotland and globally. But we're also looking at consumption. So how can we link the two? So I noticed that waste was brought up a number of times, and yes, food waste is a really significant issue, but you could also look at it as in terms of linking it to consumption and public health, in terms of, is overconsumption of food also a food waste issue? If we're not eating energy balanced diets, how do we address that, which is also linked to the public health crisis of obesity. We look at human rights across food systems, so workers' rights, the rights of communities, and these are issues that I think have been in the news fairly recently in terms of workers in agriculture, but also workers across food systems, and how can we ensure that things like modern day slavery are not tolerated within the UK, but also the food systems that we engage with at a global level. Yeah, we look across different aspects of food systems such as aggregation, transport, processing and distribution. I think this really illustrates how the problem of moving to a sustainable food system is so complex and involves all of these different stages. And so we really need to have sound evidence in order to make good decisions that don't actually lead to other knock-on effects or rebounds. And so finally, I wanted to really focus in on how the university is engaging with Edinburgh and the role that we play in terms of empowering and enhancing the skills of the communities and the citizens that we come into contact with. So recently at Easterbush and the Global Academy as part of this, we've been awarded grant funding to set up the Agri-Tech Hub. And this is part of the city deal. So this is UK and Scottish Government funding, as well as the university, to develop teaching and other mechanisms to really enhance the skills of the citizens of Edinburgh in terms of using data and the skills that, for example, working with schools to make sure that students are gaining the skills that are needed to be innovative and use data to answer the big global challenges that we're facing. Okay, so that is a real whistle-stop tour of some of the key things that the University of Edinburgh is doing. I'm also going to share a link from the Global Academy. So we've set up lots of educational programs, including my master's, which is fully online, so it is available to a global audience, but also people living in rural areas who can't perhaps be expected to come to the city of Edinburgh to do higher education. But we've also produced massive open online courses which are free to access on sustainable global food systems, and we're also working very closely with schools, particularly high schools across Scotland, try and make sure that their high school teachers and students have the resources to gain the skills to really engage with shifts towards sustainable food systems. So I've shared the link there for more information. I hope that's okay. So that's my my brief overview.
Thank you very much, Fiona. That was really fascinating, and I think it's just a reminder to us all how complex this is, and that we do need to be very careful about unintended consequences. And the point I made at the beginning, when you're bombarded with these headlines of things that need to be done, unless we look at it in a holistic way, and how we connect to that global supply chain, you know, as I say, it's the partnership approach and that understanding how we've all got to contribute to this, I think, is absolutely critical. So thank you very much. I think that was a really good reminder of the challenge ahead. If I can now hand over to Hamish Torrey, who is the CSR Communications Director at the Glenmorangie Company.
Thank you, Liz. I'm going to actually attempt to share my screen, which is revolutionary for me. So here we go. Hopefully you can see this. Can you all see that? Hello, good morning. I'm Hamish Torrey. I'm the CSR Communications Director for the Glenmorangie Company. We operate our two distilleries, Glenmorangie up on the banks of the beautiful Dornoch Firth and Ardbeg on the wild island of Islay. We are, like everybody else, doing huge work in this area. We have work streams going on now. The essence of all this is, from our point of view, is that you've got to get to the facts, and the facts you have to know. So what we're doing at the moment is doing a thorough audit of everything in our business so that we can get to the point where we know exactly what our carbon footprint is. So that process is nearing completion, and it's thrown up lots and lots of interesting challenges. I think Liz just finished then talking about the global supply chain. Our industry, the whiskey industry, Scotch whiskey industry, is a global business. Some 100 million cases of Scotch whiskey are sent across the world. We ourselves export to 135 countries, and sustaining that business for the long term is what we're in. Both our distilleries, Glenmorangie was founded in 1843, Ardbeg in 1815, and our intention is that they are there for another 100 years. So that's our approach. I just put up this first slide because we sort of all sat around thinking about this, and then we said, well, actually, everybody else, we all have to take responsibility. So the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it, by Robert Swan. That seal is a wonderful rare seal on the banks of the Dornoch Firth. So our intention is also to keep him alive as well. Now I'm just going to share these. These are our pillars, if you like. The first is carbon neutrality, obviously getting to net zero. On the left, you see a very techno piece of kit. That's an anaerobic digestion plant, which purifies our outflow into the Dornoch Firth at Glenmorangie. And that reduces our combined oxygen load on the Dornoch Firth by 97%. So we are an expanding business, but for us to keep expanding, we have to take care of our environmental impact. So 4 years ago, we commissioned this anaerobic digestion plant, which basically purifies the liquid at the end of the distillation process and returns water to the Dornoch Firth almost pure. But there's one little story at the end of this, which I'm going to mention at the end, which is about native oyster reef restoration. The other picture you can see there is peat. And of course, peatlands are incredibly important as carbon stores. And we're on the island of Islay with our lovely PTR bag. And you may have seen some announcements from other distillers about peatland restoration, and we are actively looking at that as well. The other thing, and this points a little bit to what Alan was talking about, I think, in terms of water, and also, of course, barley. Our product is very simple. It's malted barley, yeast, and water, entirely natural. And of course, we draw from the resources of Scotland's agriculture industry, but also we draw water at Glenmorangie. The picture on the right there, the lovely picture there, that's actually from our own spring, and that's basically produces all the water that we need for Glenmorangie Distillery. On Islay at our beg, we have hill lochs, which basically that's where the threat is for us, because if warming happens too much, we might be in danger there. So we're taking huge steps now to shore up and make our water efficiency use on Islay even better. The other point is that, of course, we put our whiskey in bottles, glass bottles, and they get sent around the world. We are working very hard on what we call euphemistically eco packaging, and that is, of course, using more recycled glass, lightening the glass, and perhaps removing the fancy box packaging that all us marketeers love, but are they essential? The fourth pillar, and this is the one that I spend a lot of time on, is what we call social license to operate. And that's really how, we are, a responsible company. Everything we do has to be within the law and responsibly done. So within that, we spend a lot of time talking to the environment agencies in Scotland, in particular SEPA, and the anaerobic digestion plant in Tain, which is water, Alan, seawater, but it affects the environment. When we return our water to the Dornoch Firth, we are well within compliance. We've always been within compliance, but we've gone way beyond it. So that was a multi-million-pound investment a few years ago. The other point about it, and the final point about it, is consumption. And of course, we're an alcohol business. We might be socially unacceptable in a few decades' time, but our intention is that wherever we offer our product for sale, it's done in a very responsible way with the right guidance on the packaging that savor responsibly is the message there. If I could just move on quickly, there's a upward in Tain. We've partnered with Diageo, of course, which is the biggest whiskey company in Scotch whiskey, White Mackay and Port of Cromarty and Scottish Power on a project to see if we can switch to hydrogen at some point in the future. Now, for energy accounts for about 36% of our footprint. The inputs, which are the barley and everything else, is about 43%, and freight is 11%. So about freight being moving bottles around the world and also importing materials as well to make the packaging. So those are the key sort of drivers for us, and that accounts for about 88% of our footprint. So that's where we're focused. But the energy projects, energy is key, and getting sustainable energy in remote and fragile rural communities is also really important. Fuel poverty in the Highlands is a big threat to our communities. So we with other prominent distillers are trying to lead the charge here with this project, and also with Port of Cromarty, who have a huge interest in bringing on shore that energy that's so obvious. And I just think that so if you think about this as water comes from a spring, goes back to the sea from both coastal distilleries, we have to manage that process, but also the inputs are like barley. I mean, I think the Scotch whisky industry buys about 4 million tons of barley from farmers, mostly in Scotland, every year. And so in terms of that supply chain, we have to really focus on barley with our agricultural partners. The International Barley Hub being built in Dundee has just got a huge grant from the UK government to do massive research into driving down the carbon footprint of barley production. So that's a key area for us. And just finally, as a bit of fun, I'll go back to that anaerobic digestion plant. The one thing we've gone is we've tried to create, well, we have created what we think is a very net positive story, and that is water quality enhancement in the Dornoch Firth. If you think of that, purification by the anaerobic digestion plant reduces our footprint by 97%. The other 3 or 4%, we've launched many years ago, well, 5-6 years ago, a ambitious native oyster reef restoration project in the Dornoch Firth. And basically, there were oysters, native oysters in the Dornoch Firth up to 100 years ago. And of course, they were all eaten by man. And as City of Edinburgh, you might like to know that there was once an oyster reef in the Firth of Forth, which was 20 miles by 6 miles wide. And it's all gone. So that 20 by 6 miles is about the size of the City of Edinburgh, had a native oyster reef, which has all disappeared. Now, oysters are fantastic filtrators of water. One native oyster can filter up to 200 liters of water a day, cleaning it up. And oyster reefs also are havens for marine biodiversity. And finally, and most importantly, they have the potential to lock up carbon. And we are supporting a Blue Carbon Forum conference at the Royal Society in George Street on the 11th and 12th of November as part of COP26. And this project will be talked about as well as many others from other global scientists. So that's what we're up to. We are very proud to have our HQ in the City of Edinburgh, but we have our bottling plant in Livingston. We've got our 2 distilleries and so forth. So we're a sort of a Scotland company as well as an Edinburgh company. So I hope that was of interest to the audience. And if there's anything you'd like to know, then please do ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hamish. And I think the thing that struck me, the first thing you said is that, you know, you've been around for a couple of 100 years and you want to be around for the same again in the future. And I think most businesses are the same, that longevity is really important. Yeah. And therefore responsible business is really important, and aligning to the values of our customers, but also making sure that we are addressing the net zero carbon challenge. But really good to see not only you as a business and an industry leaning into this, but you're also looking at innovative ways at protecting and restoring the planet as well.
Yes, thank you. There's just one final thing I'd like to add, which is the communities around our distilleries are a huge priority for us too, because you know, sustaining those communities which are, you know, in remote places, relatively speaking, is very important. So we've got 2 very active community programs around Tain and also on Isla, which is helping to sustain the community. Because ultimately, we need people to help us make our whiskey.
And I guess that kind of goes back to Alan's point at the very beginning, where he said, you know, a successful, thriving rural communities, probably the most circular that we can get. So I think supporting communities is absolutely critical. So thank you very much for that. So aware of time, I'm just going to hand over now to Noah Bears, who is City Analyst, Circle Economy Amsterdam.
Thank you. You can all hear me and see my screen? Perfect. Super interesting to hear all the previous panelists. Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me. I am Noah, and I work for Circle Economy, an impact organization based in Amsterdam with a vision and for an economic system that ensures that all people and the planet can thrive. To try to do so, we empower businesses, cities, and nations with data, tools, and knowledge to put circular economy into action. We hope that by doing so, we can double global circularity from 8.6% to 17% within the next 10 years, because this way we can also meet Paris. Shortly about me, I'm a city analyst at Circular Economy, as mentioned, where we use material flows data to develop circular strategies for cities. I believe also, as earlier mentioned, in the search of the sweet spot between pragmatism and idealism. And like my biblical namesake, I like to save humanity from the flood. What I like to do in the remaining time, and I hope you can bear with me after all the information from the other panelists, is quickly walk you through some key facts about the Dutch context, give you some key circular examples from the Dutch agri and food system, and to close off with why do we want to redesign our system. So also some key stats there. And what are we actually talking about if we are talking about circular agri and food? Okay, a little bit about the Dutch context. The Netherlands is one of the biggest agri and food exporters, as you might know. Half of that goes to Europe, the other half to the rest of the world. Around 1.9% in the Netherlands are employed in agriculture of the total. And agriculture contributes, well, I would say only 1.8% of the total gross value added in the Netherlands. And I think I also overheard a little bit of a discussion on it. Good to know that currently 118 out of the 162 nature reserves in the Netherlands are threatened by excessive nitrogen levels, greatly caused as part of industrial farming. And currently many construction projects are halted because of this. What then are we talking about in the Dutch agri-food context? The biggest, probably also without surprise, is flower bulbs, plants and nursery stocks with 9.5 billion worth. The second export stream is meat with a worth of 8.8 billion. Followed by milk products and eggs with 8.6 billion. Number 4 is vegetables, amongst which the tomato, which thanks God has improved in quality, but most of my Southern European friends still prefer their homegrown ones. And on number 5, we have fruits like apples and those strawberries that also were mentioned earlier during winter available as well. And 6th is drinks, amongst beers, which can also partly probably be explained because of the big market share of Heineken here in the Netherlands. That about the Dutch context, some examples from players that do it differently. This is peel pioneers. They use orange peels to make new products such as oils and fiber extracts, which can be used in both food products, but also cosmetics and cleaning products. So a wide variety. And this is the Click, a similar player. They also use waste as a resource. However, they are a little bit more holistic, and they create contracts with businesses to make all the organic waste streams into other new products, also like essential oils. So they really close full contracts with businesses and offer a full service for all the different waste, organic waste streams, I should say. Kipster, I like this one, is said to be the world's most sustainable chicken farm. Chickens are fed rest streams from bakeries and should have enough space. Keeping in mind that in the Netherlands, this is already sold at the Lidl, so has quite a big market share, and that milk and eggs was the 3rd biggest product group. I think the impact of this player should really not be underestimated. They collected different awards, and I think animal welfare, closed cycles, also keeping the roosters alive, and not only the chooks for a little bit longer, and also using those for meat production, carbon neutral, and I can go on. They try to be a business and a force for good in that sense. Lastly, Beautiful boeren in Dutch, or as how I would translate it, is neighbors for farmers, which, like other players, we also have something called herenboeren or gentleman farmers, loosely translated. They deliver food boxes directly to neighbors and citizens, so cutting down the middleman and offering a better price for farmers in that sense. Then why do we actually want to redesign our food system? Also some key facts here. The current system is deeply damaged. 690 million people are hungry, whilst 1/3 of the world's food is lost or wasted. Agri and food is responsible for 1/3 of global emissions and can be seen as half of the reason of human-induced pressures on biodiversity. Circular and regenerative agriculture farming offers a solution. But what then is it? Circular agriculture enables to produce enough food for everyone within the boundaries set by our planet. Wageningen University, based in the Netherlands here, bases it on 3 principles. So plant biomass is the basic building block of food and should be used by humans first. Byproducts from food production, processing, and consumption should be recycled back into the food system and use animals for what they're good at. I always like the quote, it's not the cow, it's the how. So also they have a part and role to play. Some thematic areas that might make it a bit more specific, soil health and toxicity, like Annelies was talking about it. If you have not yet seen it, watch the documentary Kiss the Ground, which so clearly shows the difference between earth and dirt. So I really like that one. Hemp farming could be a solution of interest in this topic. And I think for biodiversity, also the different ways of mowing can have such a big impact already. So an easy intervention that can have a big impact. Thirdly, how to monitor and manage biomass flows. So how can we solve the big manure challenge in the Netherlands, whilst in other countries they are losing so many valuable nutrients through an export deficit. So also monitoring that in a better way. And then the topic of food loss and waste, obviously, which can be addressed through, for example, the smart bins, Winnow, I know as a player, but also many of the examples that I gave earlier. Fifth is plant-based proteins. Nice to even in that case also mention a player called the Vegan Cowboys that want to make milk directly out of grass as well. So technical innovation in that sense. And lastly, vertical and precision farming, which makes me think of the Amsterdam strategy that wants to promote both small-scale city farming and highly advanced productive precision farming within the city. In that sense, I think food and agri can empower communities and are, of course, key for a sustainable transition. One more small little nudge. We have just finished a project which might be of interest to you with London to also better understand London's footprint and have assessed which interventions are most impactful from a food perspective for that city. It's being launched on the 4th of November and then publicly available. So maybe of interest to some of the people here. These were very quickly and some very high level stats on the Dutch context, some solution providers and some different perspectives on circular agri and food. I hope they offer a little bit of inspiration or spark some new ideas. And thanks a million for your time.
Thank you very much, Noah. It's good to hear about the circular economy context. I know we've been running a programme, Circular Edinburgh, for a number of years. And, you know, as much as net zero is the focus for addressing the climate challenge, I think it's only going to account for about 50% of that. And it's the circular economy that will deliver the remaining 50%. That we need to change, and actually it drives the behavior change.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to focus a little bit more on how we look at circular economy for the city and for Scotland. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective on that. We've probably got about 15 minutes to go for some questions. I know there was a couple. I've just got to scroll up through my chat. So I think the first one, bit of a challenge to you guys. So Michael Lenahan, I'll just read it out if that's okay, Michael. So the food system accounts for a significant portion of Scotland's territorial emissions and its carbon footprint, inclusive of what we import in the form of food and feed. So I was really hoping we are going to go beyond how difficult change is and instead focus on the desperate need to decarbonise the food system and the practical and immediate actions that can be taken, not just by consumers, but the whole food system. I think we kind of, as we progress through the discussion, I think we've seen how complex that is. Does anybody want to come in first with that?
Well, I once, because that also makes me think of this question, and there was an initiative from Michelle Obama who wanted to fight obesitas in the United States, and they started collaborating with different businesses to also lower the amount of sugars, but also promote a healthier lifestyle. And in the end, after that collaboration, it was all focused on the individual and a healthier lifestyle. So it kind of pushed it off from the businesses and towards the consumer. So I think it's a realistic threat that this is happening, and I think we should be aware of that and keep this holistic view in mind. So they both have a role to play, says the idealist in me. Yeah,
no, thank you. Does anybody else want to come in? Annalise, you're obviously doing a lot of work in that area anyway. I think probably the next question relates
Liz,
to you. Oh,
Liz,
yes.
Sorry. On that one, I think it's a really important question. And in the city's climate strategy, we've in the version that we consulted on, we focused on scope 1 and 2 emissions for very good reasons. But I think we're recognizing that kind of wider holistic responsibility, while it's difficult to count always and attribute kind of responsibility for scope 3 supply chain consumerism based emissions, we do need to strengthen what we're saying about that in the strategy so that it becomes far more visible, that even though we can't count it in always very consistent ways, we need to be visibly prioritizing it as an action area. And I think one of the comments I heard here today, though, in terms of it not all being about behavior is really important. And it's how we find a way to support this. And that's, we need to rethink what we value in the business models, as well as what we are asking consumers and our citizens to value and prioritize in their consumerism and their behaviors. So I think that's something to draw out, and I'll definitely be going away and thinking about how we make that really visible in the climate strategy.
Could I add a comment? And I think it's particular to looking at the environmental impacts of food systems in general, not just decarbonising, but looking at our place in a global food system and the impact that we have on rural communities and in developing economies as well. And I think that it is that we need to remember that food systems primarily are to provide food and nutrition. And when we put the emphasis on individuals making choices about their diet, sometimes we forget that those individuals, their diet is mainly there to provide them a healthy, active life. And so we need to also really look at across the food systems and systemic changes within business. And it's great to hear from a range of different businesses that are really leaning into this. But I am always very much aware that when we make suggestions to say, okay, change your diet in a certain way as an individual, that individual must make those decisions based on health the primary impact. I just wanted to add that.
Brilliant. Sorry. Alan, did I see your hand go up there?
Yeah, no, supporting what Fiona is saying, and those decisions are there. I was one of the most powerful discussions we've had about food in Scotland was around the Good Food Nation, and there's a lot of work with the Scottish Government, and I think someone's linked to the consultation at the moment on the chat. I remember Shirley Spears talking at an event in central Edinburgh, talking about food poverty. And when we preach about food poverty to people, and we say, well, why don't they buy a chicken from a sustainably reared source, cook it, eat it as a roast, then make a curry with the leftovers and boil the bones for stock and make soup, because that's all very sustainable. Shirley said that's fine. If they can't afford to switch the oven on to cook a chicken that you give them, food poverty makes food choices very difficult. And fundamentally, we need to have those detailed discussions. And I think, you know, Michael's point was raised after I spoke, Liz, and I deliberately skated over the top of some of these things because I knew there's better speakers coming. I think it's this, how, as Fiona used it, how do we lean into this and give people choices? Noah touched on, you know, byproducts being left behind from food export. You know, just exporting and importing our food from other countries does not alleviate the global problem. So, you know, the Danish pork business, the Dutch pork business are very well understood businesses, but they have an impact where Noah is operating. Our whiskey impact has an impact in Scotland when we export to India, and likewise. And I think probably what I didn't do was I undersold the activities that grassroots businesses are doing around soil carbon, water management, rewilding, peat re-wetting, catchment management. You know, on a day like today, I'm 90% sure that the Rest and Be Thankful will be closed. And, you know, that's a food and tourism issue for the circular economy of Argyll. It's also a land management and farming and water issue. And all of these things are linked. So I think that the challenge is in 8 minutes or less, or in a group discussion, it's really complex to get over. But I think we have to be aware of those interdependencies of the food business, probably like no other, because it does have an impact on, you know, all of the pieces of the jigsaw you've done in the 3 other events in this series, Liz, have all had a link to food, to land, to water, to energy, to tourism, and to the economy. So, you know, we could do, each one of us could do a master's or a PhD in a small aspect of the subject that was raised today, and we still wouldn't touch it.
No, and I think it was Fiona who suggested this is very complex. And we are scratching the surface in the discussion this morning, but I suppose ultimately, hopefully Paul and her team will get some real insights on what people are doing, what needs to be done, and then as a city, you know, I suppose we're focusing on Edinburgh, and I think, Hamish, you said, you know, the greatest threat is that if somebody else is going to do the saving. I think if we can focus on Edinburgh and our sustainability strategy and not try and boil the ocean, then we can certainly drive change for ourselves. And I think it is extraordinary the amount of work and innovation that's happening just locally, and capturing that by this discussion, I think has certainly opened up everyone's eyes to what's being done, but also what needs to be done, and how the partnership of that is really important. I did want to bring in Monty's comment to Annalise. I think ideally we should get away from disposables as much as possible. I guess the compostable ones would be your best option, but do you have any comments on that, Annalise?
Yeah, definitely. I think what Monty's saying is true. I think if the world can move towards using less disposables, that is obviously, you know, a fantastic thing. Do I think we're there yet? Definitely not. Veg sees itself as a stopgap in between customers who currently are using disposables and are perhaps using plastic, you know, oil-based disposables, and, you know, transitioning perhaps towards using reusables. a lot of our clients, one of which is the government buildings offer, they provide an offering for food for their staff, and they provide china cups for all their drinks and glasses for all their cold drinks, and then they use our takeaway packaging for staff who aren't going to be sitting in the canteen space. And I think that's like a nice equilibrium. They're still going to be able to offer their food service, and where staff are able to sit down in the canteen space and utilize that area. But when staff are busy running around the office, or perhaps also, another good example would be Murrayfield, 70,000 people, half an hour break. Are you going to serve everyone on china crockery in that half an hour break? Do they even have the facilities to wash reusables? And the answer there is no, they don't. So I feel it's like a stopgap, and it's sort of the best solution if you're looking at disposables. And we definitely do support customers who want to look down the reusable route. A really good example on how I feel that we're not quite there yet as a society is a project which the Boston Tea Party did. They're a cafe chain down in Bristol, and they decided to stop offering disposables and would only offer customers coffee in a reusable coffee cup, or they could purchase a reusable coffee cup at the site if they weren't sitting in. And in the first month, they saw a 70% drop in sales. Well, we're not quite there yet as a society. And unfortunately, to add to that is COVID. We've seen a huge increase in sales in sites which previously weren't using disposables purely for the stopgap period of hopefully, last year and this year, and hopefully no longer, where sites are perhaps nervous about using reusables, such as hospitals, primary schools, and crisis shelters, which are sort of serving, meals to go to people who can't afford to feed themselves. And at the moment, they're using disposables because they're, ultimately nervous around using reusables and washing, and the information wasn't first out there about how you could sort of hygienically clean things. So I definitely agree. I think there should be a move to disposables. I just don't think we're there yet as a society. And for some situations, such as sort of enclosed spaces like a stadium, it makes sense to serve in reusable containers, disposable containers, which can then be composted down and properly recycled in this sort of waste hierarchy cycle, rather than disposables which ultimately can't be recycled and would probably end up at landfill or incineration. And until we're there as a society where we can offer reusables throughout, I think this is probably a good stopgap.
Thank you. I see you've got your hand up. Fiona, do you want to come in?
Actually, it was just, I noticed a really interesting question from Graham Ferguson, and I wondered if I could sort of use it as a way to illustrate some of the complexities. I don't know if everybody else can see it, but he's talking about, do we need to promote more localism and reduce the amount of food that we're importing from distance? And I think that this issue really encapsulates some of the problems that we are facing in terms of addressing the sustainability of our food system. So many people are very concerned about the impact of, for example, palm oil, and it is linked to deforestation and to human rights abuses. And when you start to look at the evidence around this, it's very unclear what the solution should be. So if we do take, say, the Iceland route and remove all palm oil from products, even sustainably certified, sustainably produced palm oil, what does the evidence say? Is that going to stop the driving force of deforestation and so prevent the harm that we are concerned with? And the evidence would say it's unclear, but it could actually lead to further deforestation as local communities are looking for other alternatives to gain revenue. And are we then therefore placing the pressure for the oil that we need on a wider amount of land? And are we also ignoring our responsibility to help rural communities across the globe to develop and to find sustainable revenue streams? So I would say it's really important to try and support as much as possible our local rural communities and food producers and food companies, but also to use evidence to say where we can actually have a positive effect on our global neighbours. And not make very, very black and white judgments. And I just thought that was a really important question. And each commodity is going to have different solutions, but I thought that really illustrates some of the very wicked problems, to use a sort of a fancy term, that food systems encapsulate.
Brilliant. And I think I'm just going to bring you in, Noah, but I think that sort of illustrates Alan's earlier point about making binary decisions. This is way more complex than that. Noah, you want to come in?
Yeah, also mentioning on that complexity, because I do see a role for national governments, or maybe it's supranational, so the European Union level. Because I think for packaging, when you talk about packaging, you have 250 different kinds of plastics. Now you have the biodegradable alternatives. And I think it's great that Annelies is also having this end-of-life solutions of picking them up. But all those biodegradable plus all those other plastics makes it more complex again. So I really would wish that there comes some clarity on which kinds of packaging we can use for what, and have a default of 8 options. And I see a role for the government there to create that clarity, to reduce complexity.
Thank you. I see Will Anderson's got his hand up. Bring you in, Will.
Hi, I'm Will Anderson from CMS, and I work in the dispute resolution team in CMS. And one thing that I've been looking at work is recent class actions internationally in relation to what we now call climate change litigation. And this whole conversation, and actually the conversation about waste, food waste, or disposable waste and importing, just raises this question of when, because it's not if, it'll be when, will we see a climate change litigation in Scotland or in the UK, which forces the government or business to take certain steps on behalf of a class of claimant. And what we're seeing internationally in countries like Portugal, the Netherlands, is class actions brought by children in particular to force governments' hands to take certain steps in relation to emissions and climate change. And I think it's inevitable that we'll see a claim brought at some stage which will relate to possibly food waste, disposables waste, or in actual fact, importation of foods from international countries, palm oil as an example. So I just thought I'd throw that in there and share my thoughts on that.
Have we lost Liz? Looks like it.
Yep. I think
well, I think that it's a fascinating question, is when will class action start being taken in a country like Scotland, which is probably not something we've considered. And I sit on part of Scottish Government's Agricultural and Rural Stakeholder Group. And I think if you were to throw that question to that group, they would probably be a very long, deep draw of breath and not much of a response, because they probably haven't considered that likelihood. So it'd be a big game changer, I think. I don't know if Fiona's got any views on where that might come from. I think governments are reticent to lead, on Noah's point, because we are, free market, and they're nervous because it's very difficult to give one clear option that would be manageable. But I don't know, Fiona, do you have a view?
I think it's very interesting to see, and thank you, Will, for bringing those up. And I'm sorry to always be the one to say that things are so very complex, but I think that we've seen in the past the application of principles like the precautionary principle are very complicated in law. But I think that having a growing number of these cases, as you say, Will, is bound to have a really significant impact on the way that policies are implemented, and that governments look at this. And I hope that it really helps to drive change. And I think that industry will also be watching really carefully. And we've seen in the past that these sorts of legal approaches have really helped the case for investing in sustainability in businesses. And I think that maybe Hamish would agree that once, if you're in an organization that is driven by profit once you can show the risk to your operation of not actually taking up action. That can be a really beneficial process within an organization. So it will be really, I think, a really good driving motivator for action.
Yeah, I think it's just to follow on from that. I think from the point of view of other things we're seeing is businesses really putting forward their ESG policy, and actually that will come in time. It will come in pressure from shareholders of those companies. There will be certain large businesses which will have shareholders say, it's not good enough anymore, and we need to see a better ESG policy, and we actually need to see you follow through with it. And we as shareholders can effectively force you, the board of directors, into implementing those policies. So again, it's another factor from the legal sector that we are considering it with clients and seeing with clients already.
Yeah,
If I may just jump in on that, Will, I think, you know, Hamish touched on mandate to operate. All of our businesses, whether you're a dog and stick farmer in the Clyde Valley, or whether you're up in Acklety Buoy, or whether you're Glenmorangie in a global context, we all have to have that mandate to operate. There's a quick question from Harriet there about government supporting, you know, less intensive agriculture, more environmentally friendly ways. Scottish Government's already doing a lot on that. Scotland will be a niche producer of high quality produce. Scots beef will always be you know, different to beef produced in different systems across the world. And I think these discussions, as much as they might frustrate Michael for not getting into the sort of the minutiae of how we change these things, are all going to flag that up. So if I can do a plug for the summit next week for the chamber, I'm chairing a session which looks really interesting about some of these things. Michael is one of the top guys in the brewing department at Heriot Watt talking about protein use. And I think, as for me, and we talked about this recently in wider chamber business, was how do we make COP the starting point for these discussions rather than this being an event that finishes that? And I know that Andrew and Paula at the council are really keen to have that. So, you know, let's try and get these discussions continued and pick up on some of them. You know, I'm going to speak to Annalise about the Royal Highland Show because we've got vegware everywhere. But you know, we probably need a more collaborative approach across our 200 events across the year. And I'm going to speak to Hamish about a project that I think I want to work with him on as well. So yeah, let's use these as an opportunity to start the discussions.
Yeah.
thanks, Alan. I think Liz is trying to come in, so maybe I'll just close the event. I think there's a couple of questions about sharing presentations. So if the speakers are happy, no, there was one question for sharing a presentation. We'll share the presentations after the event. I think it's been a really great discussion. I think food and drink security is a really big topic. So I think it's been a great discussion this morning. First of all, I want to thank all our speakers, to Alan, to Hamish, to Annalise, and to Fiona, and to Noah for their interesting presentations and their thoughts today. And we're also happy to share your contact details if that's okay with our panelists. As Alan said, we're hosting the summit, the COP26 Edinburgh Summit next week. It's fully booked, but there's a few places left if anybody wants to attend. And thank you also to Paula and the City of Edinburgh Council team for supporting the event today. And I hope you all have a wonderful day and rest of the day. Thank you, everybody. Take care now.
Thanks all. Towards action.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Sorry,
everyone.
I lost my broadband there, but thanks very much for Mayanne. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.